We'll continue to monitor the transfer and check in with our own Pete Hegseth, who is in Hawaii, just a few minutes from now. Good evening. Welcome to Tucker Carlson Tonight. First, we want to tell you that today marks the second day of Paul Manafort's trial in Virginia. Manafort is charged with tax evasion and filing false loan documents. The average sentence for tax fraud in this country is a little over a year in prison, a year and 3 months. Manafort is facing 305 years in prison. He is 69 years old. He has never been charged with a crime. If he's convicted in this trial, Paul Manafort will die in prison. The left thinks that's just fine. Manafort ran Donald Trump's presidential campaign. They believe he deserves to die for that. Well, watching from the White House, the president tweeted this today about the trial, quote, "Looking back on history, who was treated worse, Alphonse Capone, legendary mob boss, killer, and public enemy number one, or Paul Manafort, political operative and Reagan Dole darling, now serving solitary confinement, although convicted of nothing? Where is the Russian collusion?" It's an interesting point, actually. Al Capone ordered the murders of scores of people. He got an 11-year sentence and was released after just 8. He was barely 40 years old when he got out of prison, probably because he never made the mistake of managing an unfashionable political campaign. The plan for Paul Manafort, meanwhile, is to ensure that he dies behind bars. Mueller's lead prosecutor in this case, Andrew Weissmann, is working hard to make sure that happens. If you were at Hillary Clinton's election night party in New York City, you may recognize Andrew Weissmann. He was there too, hoping to celebrate Hillary's victory. Now he is doing the next best thing, avenging Hillary's defeat. Keep in mind that in America, justice is supposed to be evenly applied. It may be the best thing about our country. Political differences aren't supposed to get you locked behind bars. And then came the resistance and everything changed. Opposing Trump became a matter of total war, whatever it takes, even if it means corrupting our justice system and ending a man's life. Dan Bongino is a former Secret Service agent, NRA TV contributor, author of the brand new book Spygate, The Attempted Sabotage of Donald J. Trump. Dan Bongino joins us now. So, Dan, I hate to think that any prosecution is politically motivated, but in a country in which a year and 3 months is the average sentence for tax evasion, to see a man facing 305 years raises red flags, to put it mildly.
Tucker, this case is a disgrace. Listen, I was a federal agent. I don't know Paul Manafort. I don't know what he's guilty of or not guilty of, but I am familiar with federal investigations and the tactics used. And I can tell you with a clean conscience, I have never, ever seen heavy-handed government tactics like this used for what is essentially a process crime and basically a white-collar crime for a guy with no criminal pedigree at all to speak of. This is unheard of. You know, you said at the beginning of the show, justice is supposed to be even-handed. It's supposed to be blind too, Tucker, but it appears to be blind only to Democrats. Paul Manafort is guilty of something. He's guilty of helping Donald Trump win, and that's what's bothering the Mueller probe.
So so the point of criminal punishment is to render justice, to do something proportionate, appropriate, to send the statement, we don't accept this kind of behavior. That's why we punish tax evasion, and we should. And also to protect the public, to make sure that someone who's a threat to the rest of us is no longer walking free. In this case, the prosecution didn't even explain how he defrauded the banks. Did the banks lose money? I don't think they did. They didn't explain how much he should have paid in federal taxes but didn't. And I don't think there's a single person in America who feels a physical threat or even a moral threat from 69-year-old Paul Manafort. I mean, they're not even pretending this isn't political.
No, they're not. If they are, they're doing a really poor job. And it really begs the question, Tucker, if the federal government and all the taxpayer assets that support it thought Paul Manafort was such a threat to the republic, why didn't they warn the Trump team? Barack Obama was the president of the United States, not the Democrat Party. Why didn't they warn the Trump team that this dangerous threat that had to be put in solitary confinement, that had to have the full force of the government weaponized against him? Why didn't they warn them? The answer is because they didn't believe that. I told you, Manafort is guilty of something. He's guilty of helping Donald Trump win. And by the way, Tucker, some of the same process crimes and suspicious activity Mueller's accused Manafort of, ironically enough, Democrats accused of the same thing, or people connected to Democrats, seem to have gotten up to this point a relatively free legal pass.
Even as a matter of for appearances, would you, if you were Robert Mueller, appoint as the lead prosecutor in a case against Donald Trump's former campaign manager, a Hillary partisan who went to her victory party on election night.
Tucker, they're not. I'm laughing because this is a joke. They're not even hiding it. Can I double down on you?
Yeah.
How about this? Andrew Weissman, yes, attended Hillary's party. Jeannie Rhee, who was one of his lead prosecutors in the case, represented the Clinton Foundation. Aaron Zebley, Tucker, another prosecutor in the case who's friendly with the whole Mueller crew, represented one of the Clinton guys involved in the destruction of the BlackBerries as a lawyer. This is really happening right now. And by the way, other ones are donors to Democratic candidates. You would think a guy with Bob Mueller's level of intelligence, no one's claiming he's a dumb guy, by the way. You would think he would be smart enough to pick this out and pick other lawyers and at least attempt to look nonpartisan. For some reason, they don't seem to care.
Yeah, or they're totally lacking in self-awareness. Almost everybody in that world is lacking self-awareness because they don't know anyone who disagrees with them, which is part of the problem. Dan Bongino, thank you, as always, for the clear explanation.
Thank you, sir.
Well, the Carter Page FISA application has been released in part. Big portions of it, though, were redacted, and those portions could help reveal the extent to which the Obama administration surveilled the Trump campaign, which they did. Congressman Devin Nunes is the chairman of the House Intelligence Committee. He represents California in the House of Representatives, and he joins us tonight. Mr. Chairman, thank you for coming on. So you've seen the entire document, the entire application, FISA applications to spy on Carter Page and then the Trump campaign. Much of it was redacted, pages and pages redacted. Do you believe, knowing what was redacted, that the public has a right to see that information?
Absolutely. So what we heard for a long time is that the memo that we created to make sure that the American public knew that the FISA contained the Steele dossier, or the so-called dirt that the Clinton campaign paid for, bought it from Russians, fed it to the FBI in order to get a FISA warrant on Carter Page. We said that that made up the bulk of the FISA. We were made fun of. We were told that was wrong, that we were lying, when in fact we were 100% right. It did make up the bulk of the FISA. Then you noticed that right after that came out, they said, well, but what's really important is the information that's redacted. Then, lo and behold, they found out that just a couple months before, the Republicans on the House Intelligence Committee had actually asked for about 20 pages, at least 20 pages, to be declassified of the Carter Page FISA. Those today, Tucker, remain redacted and hidden from the public. We believe that if the public saw that information, they would have a very clear picture to what Director Comey called a mosaic. And I think the public needs to understand, what is this mosaic that was created by the FBI, fed to the DOJ, fed to a FISA court in order to spy on an American citizen and effectively get information directly from the Trump campaign.
Yeah, so here you have the Obama administration spying on a rival political campaign, specifically on a man who has never been charged for the crimes that were the pretext of the spying in the first place. And yet no one on the left cares at all. And I guess my question to you, again, having seen the information that I'm not allowed to see, is there a good reason, a national security-based reason, to keep that information from the public? On what grounds was it redacted?
Oh, quite the opposite. There is a national security reason to make sure that the American public sees this in its entirety, because this is a phony FISA. Okay, the Department of Justice and the FBI put something together that is completely fraudulent in order to spy on an American citizen. It's our job as Congress to bring sunlight and full transparency to this, process.
Then let's do that now.
It's in the best interest of the DOJ and FBI to let that happen.
Okay, then why don't you send it to me now, and I will put it on the air in the back half of the show. I mean it. I'm dead serious. You are the chairman of the House Intelligence Committee.
Yeah.
You are elected by voters to make these judgments. Bureaucrats elected by nobody are telling us, threatening us, basically, that it hurts national security. You're the one with the power. Why don't you send it to me? We will put it on the air and let the public decide. Is there a penalty for that?
Well, just remember, I'm not the one with the power. Now, hypothetically, could I go to the House floor, or could I go out in my official duties and tell the American public what's in the rest of that FISA? I could, However, I mean, you already see, remember, most of the media and the left is against us and against it. They don't want the rest of this out. They want to keep this hidden. Can you imagine the field day they would have against me or if any other Republicans talked about what is now classified information?
So you have journalists arguing on behalf of holding information back. I mean, that's insane. If you live in a world where journalists are saying the public should know less, they have been discredited by definition. We don't have to listen to them. They are not journalists. They're something less. They're flacks. So is there a penalty for doing that? Because this seems like a really important question.
You understand, Chucker. Yes, that's the problem. You understand this. There's a penalty, right? So we can't create a situation. But what can happen right now? How do we get this done? Is the president just needs to step in and declassify this. He has said he doesn't want to get involved, but quite frankly, that he needs to get involved in this. It doesn't involve him. If he would just declassify it, then we as Congress would have no problem coming on your show and talking about this declassified information.
Yeah, because there's no argument against
can understand
it. And by the way, if you believe in democracy, yeah, well, I hope someone will leak it to me. I do. Because I think the public has a right to know, and I'd love to know why the public doesn't have a right to know. And I'd love all these anchors every day telling me I don't have a right to know. Really, why? Speak slowly so I can understand. It's infuriating. Mr. Chairman, thank you for all the work you have done.
It is.
And I hope someone will send that to me. We'll put it right on the air immediately. I promise you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Better IDs could protect American lives and the integrity of our elections, but they might make life harder for people who are here illegally. So, of course, the left opposes all that. We'll tell you why next. Plus, we'll keep our eye on Hawaii, where the remains of Korean war servicemen are being returned after decades in North Korea. Pete Hegseth joins us from Hawaii just ahead. Welcome back. We're going to get to a new segment in just a second, but I just wanted to say this. We spoke to the chairman of the House Intelligence Committee a minute ago, Devin Nunes of California, who I think is an honorable person. And he is obviously empowered by his position in Congress and by voters really to have access to any intelligence that he wants to. He has read the full text of the application for the FISA warrant that allowed the government, the Obama administration, to spy on Carter Page and the Trump campaign. He says the parts that have been redacted do not in any way threaten American national security, that it's merely butt covering on the part of the bureaucracy. We ask the obvious question, which is, why don't you just tell us what's in it? Let the public decide. Let the public judge. In the commercial break, I got an interesting text I'm going to read on the air from a very informed person in Washington who said this, and I'm quoting, Dianne Feinstein entered the CIA torture memo, so-called, into the record in the Senate and was protected by the speech and debate clause. Any Republican with access to the FISA warrant could do the same. Complete immunity awaits them. I believe that to be true. Again, this just happened in a commercial break. We haven't checked it, but I think that's right. But I will say one more time, if you know what is in the redacted portions of that application, please send it to us. The public has a right to know. There's no excuse for withholding that from the public. Let us decide. Now to another big story. In the response to the 9/11 attacks, Congress passed a law, a famous one, requiring the adoption of a real ID across America. A lot of the hijackers had fake IDs. The real ID imposes various requirements on photo identification to make it harder to counterfeit. Beginning in 2020, you will need a real ID to fly on an airplane, for example. These IDs should make us safer and our elections more secure. So, of course, the left is totally opposed to them because illegal immigrants won't be able to get them. Joe Veronese is an attorney from San Francisco, a candidate for district attorney there, and he joins us tonight. Joe, thanks a lot for coming on.
Thanks for having me, Tucker.
So I haven't checked the vote. I probably should have, but I don't think the Real ID Act faced really any opposition in the Congress because it seemed like such a no-brainer. If you have a government ID, we need to know that it's valid. It's real. It's for American citizens, and it kind of matters. 9/11 showed us that it matters. Why are Democrats suddenly against it? I'm confused.
Well, I think that's why we have a passport. The passport essentially does that. This, however, is basically another attempt by this president to influence an election, and that's why the Democrats aren't for it. First, it was the meeting with the Russians. Then it was the issue with the census question, and now it's the real IDs. It's a requirement that is basically it's a voter suppression strategy that will influence elections by discouraging and preventing special groups such as lower-income people, minorities from actually going to the ballot. And so that's why we're against it.
I'm a little bit confused by this for two reasons. I'll just go in order.
Yeah.
One, you have to be an American citizen to vote in a federal election. So there's nothing wrong, of course, with requiring that only American citizens vote in federal elections. Do you agree with that?
Well, not necessarily in San Francisco. We have a school board election here that we actually allow immigrants to vote in.
In federal
but
elections,
in federal elections,
it is a law
yes,
that you have
agree,
to be
absolutely.
a citizen. Yes. Okay.
Absolutely.
So, and the second question is, I keep hearing this line that poor people or African Americans don't have IDs. We actually checked the research on that, and it's totally false. There's no large group of people in America that doesn't have a government ID. There isn't one. But I'm wondering if you think it is patronizing for Democrats to say, well, black people somehow can't get IDs. Don't you think that's kind of a slur, actually?
It's not just about IDs. With this, the requirements of the real ID are that you have to have a U.S. passport. And if you look at who has U.S. passports, you're talking about wealthy people, not minorities, higher educated people. And so only, I think, about 42% of Americans actually have U.S. passports. Another problem with this is that it requires you to show proof of residency, where exactly it is that you live. So there's some privacy issues there. And one of those documents is actually a tax document, your IRS taxes. Not even our president will show us his taxes. But this will actually require you to show a document like that.
So you have to prove residency. I mean, wait, but hold on. So you must be against Social Security numbers, too, I would think.
No, I'm not against Social Security numbers. Social Security numbers serve a specific purpose. This document doesn't serve any
this would serve a specific purpose. Oh, it doesn't. So the U.S.
No, it doesn't.
has
you have U.S.
No, wait, hold on.
passports
So we don't have. So when but you just hold on. You just said only a minority of Americans have U.S. passports. You're making an argument for and against passports within a minute of each other. I mean, even for an attorney, that's pretty impressive. You just said this is wrong because it requires the use of passports, and in the next sentence you said people can just use passports. I mean,
it's not just the use of passports. I do believe that you should have a passport
but pick a side on the passport thing.
Abroad, and that's a specific purpose for that specific document. So if the government's trying to say you need to be a U.S. citizen to vote, then why not require them to get a passport? This actually requires them to do much more, and it requires the state to do it, which is the problem. Because the next requirement, as you mentioned in your prologue, was that this is going to be applied to voters, and that's where the rubber meets the road.
Well, that's only in my wish, because somehow Democrats are claiming that it's racist to get someone's ID before he votes, but not racist to get ID before he gets welfare benefits or checks into a hotel or gets a job or opens a bank account or flies on an airplane or does anything else in American life. That's not racist. But asking for ID is racist because somehow black people can't get ID, which is the most patronizing, I would say borderline racist assumption I've heard this week, right?
Well, no, I mean, we statistically, we have seen that lower minority people and that this ID has been used as a process. Yeah, has been lower income people and minorities, that the requirement for IDs has been a segregation tool historically. And so that's why the Democrats...
lots of things have happened historically, but right now, every lower income person in America has an ID because you can't live without one. You can't get any benefits. You can't participate in any part of American life without a government ID, period. So everybody has a government ID, and Democrats throw up these fake studies, which are totally false. Like, everybody has an ID. We know this, right? Where are these people who don't have IDs? Do you know where they live? You shouldn't be prevented from participating in American, every aspect of American life if you're not a citizen of the United States. And that's what this is basically requiring, is that you are a citizen of the United States. Okay.
That's exactly the point.
Do you think it's racist to require a government ID to get on a plane or check into a hotel?
No, of course I don't.
Oh, you don't? Okay, just checking. Okay, Joe, thank you. Great to see you. I love that. I don't know why. It's hilarious. All right. Our election system is supposed to be safe from efforts by non-citizens to vote, but thousands of non-citizens are already appearing on the voter rolls. You'll hear on other channels, that's a myth. It's not a myth. It's true. Some of them are casting ballots. J. Christian Adams is president of the Public Interest Legal Foundation. He joins us tonight with details. So, Christian, we keep hearing that's untrue. It's never happened. Is it true? Prove to us that it's true.
Well, you can go to our website at publicinterestlegal.org and pull up the original records Tucker, of the dozens upon dozens, hundreds upon hundreds of people that are getting onto the voter rolls from Russia, Canada, Mexico. And some of them are tragic stories. Refugees from Sudan who said, I told them I wasn't a citizen, but they kept pushing me under motor voter to register to vote, even though I told them I wasn't a citizen.
Well, I mean, how does that happen? I thought that there would be, since it is a federal law, barring non-citizens from voting in federal elections, there would be some mechanism to prevent it. It seems like there's a mechanism to encourage it.
Right. It's the broken motor voter system. What happens when you go into any DMV office is they're pushing you. And in places like Pennsylvania, we know that there was a glitch for 2 decades where non-citizens were getting on the rolls. We just published a report called Stealing the Vote about Pittsburgh, where non-citizens were getting on the rolls. They were voting. They were begging to be removed when they got their citizenship applications because they could go to jail. And so what was happening was people were marking, yes, I'm a citizen, but they were from Russia, or they were simply lying over and over again and voting. College students and get out the vote drives were registering and voting, even they're from other countries. The system does not have a check. That's what people need to understand. There's no verification. It's an honor system, and that's why so many aliens are getting on the rolls.
Exactly. And the same people who lecture us about the sanctity of our democracy and the efforts of foreign countries to subvert it are the same ones pushing this garbage. Christian Adams, thank you for the work that you do on this. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Tucker.
Well, the group organizing California's secession plans for the United States are back with a new scheme that would take half the state and make an Indian reservation out of it. Amazing. Their leader joins us to explain next. Google shut down its Chinese search engine in 2010. At the time, they said it was because China was attacking free speech. But things have changed. The left doesn't care about free speech anymore. So it was no surprise today to see new reports that Google is building a brand new censored search engine that will allow it to re-enter the Chinese market, will be actively abetting the communist police state there and crushing dissent. Google's behavior doesn't end there, though, in China. Last year, Google opened a major artificial intelligence research center in that country, even though China is aggressively pursuing military uses of artificial intelligence against the United States. Scott Cleland is the author of Search and Destroy, You Can't Trust Google, Inc. He joins us tonight. Scott, good to see you. So if your corporate motto was don't be evil, it seems like helping a communist police state crush dissent would fall into the evil category, right?
Absolutely. I mean, we're talking about how can you mess with 1.4 billion people? How can you aid and abet the oppression of the largest country in the world? So it's definitely.
It's hard to believe that a country with the market cap that Google has, the most powerful company in the history of the world, maybe the richest company in the history of the world, would be so desperate for more market share that they would help prop up a police state. But that seems like what they're doing.
Well, what's really interesting is Google is all about power. It wants to be influential and it wants to be everywhere for everything. And so that it can't stand the fact that it's not playing in China. And because it sees 1.4 billion people that it doesn't track and it doesn't know about. And so that's really what they want. They really covet power, and information is power to them. That's what's always scared me about this company is, it makes no sense to centralize all the world's information in one place and controlled by one person.
Information is power for them, but their pitch was always information will empower the rest of us as well. But the deal that they are striking in China would withhold information from the population. They would be complicit in the brainwashing and propaganda efforts of the Chinese government. It's exactly the opposite of what they said Google was about.
Look, what they're doing is completely opposite of what they promised everybody or what they've said they've stood for. They've said they were don't be evil. They were for freedom of speech. They were for a free and open internet. They were for net neutrality, which is never supposed to block anything. And they were the main corporate funder of that. And this is basically blocking every single freedom website in the world from getting into China. There's nothing neutral about that. There's nothing free, nothing open, nothing good about what they're talking about doing.
No, it's fascist. And where the hell is the American left on this? Why are they continuing to defend this company, which is aiding, again, in the oppression of a police state of its own people?
Hopefully they're going to come around, because this one is completely indefensible. I mean, even Google themselves stood up and said, we can't do this. This is too bad. Yet 7 years they're coming back and doing it in much larger scale than they were going to do before.
Yeah. Congress should take action against Google immediately, in my opinion. Scott, thank you very much. It's good. Thank you for that perspective.
Yes.
And for your book.
Thank you.
The historic ceremony in Hawaii tonight, the remains of Korean war dead have finally been returned after more than 60 years from North Korea. We'll go there live just ahead. State. You'll know that if you've been there. One of the prettiest places on the continent. Granite mountains, deep forests, clean water. The people are impressive too. The kids in New Hampshire get some of the highest SAT scores in the country. And it's safe. The crime rate in New Hampshire is just a fraction of that in other states. A lot of people in New Hampshire have guns, and yet the homicide rate is less than 1/10 the rate in Washington, D.C. Very few New Hampshire residents are in prison. It's got one of the country's lowest incarceration rates. Most of them are working. The state has one of America's lowest unemployment rates. In contrast to places like Illinois, New Hampshire is gaining population. People want to live there, not surprisingly. Yet, according to the New York Times, New Hampshire needs to change desperately and immediately. Why is that? Well, in a story over the weekend, the Times explained that New Hampshire is, quote, nearly all white, 94%, and this has caused, quote, an array of problems. The paper doesn't prove that this is true. In fact, there's zero evidence that the demographics of the state hurt the people who live there. New Hampshire's actual problems, and it has some, have nothing to do with race at all. Instead, though, the Times argues that New Hampshire's whiteness is inherently offensive to others, especially immigrants. The paper interviewed a woman from Columbia who complained that she cannot find enough Spanish speakers in New Hampshire, and that is unacceptable. According to the New York Times, Americans have an obligation to change their culture to suit foreigners and not the other way around. But more than anything, the paper says, the state must become less white quickly, like the rest of the country. Its current demographics are an outrage. A group of self-appointed officials and business leaders is working to change the racial makeup of New Hampshire right now. Thank God, says the Times. What's so striking about this story is how ordinary it is. You hear things like this all the time from liberal outlets. Some races are better than others, they claim. Some are just plain awful. Well, that's pure racism, of course. It's the very definition of racism. But it's so ubiquitous on the left that hardly anybody notices it or questions it. You're not allowed to, by the way. Your job is just to nod in bovine agreement. Yes, diversity is our strength. But nobody should agree to that. It's wrong, and it's dangerous. Attitudes like this will destroy our country faster than anthrax and Al-Qaeda combined. Racism is poison. Let's be clear so that even the bigots at the New York Times can understand. No race is inherently better than any other race. There can't be too many of any group. Are there too many Chinese in Beijing, too many Africans in Congo? Of course not. Those are stupid questions. The same is true for the people of New Hampshire, many of whose families have been there for hundreds of years. There is nothing wrong with the way they look. They're not defective or inadequate because of their skin color. It's amazing you even have to say that. But nobody is defective or inadequate because of his or her skin color. All of us should remember that and demand that our leaders remember it too. Many have forgotten it. Well, the remains of Korean war dead held for decades in North Korea have finally come back to U.S. soil. They're in Hawaii tonight. Vice President Mike Pence was on hand to receive the remains. The historic event finished just a few minutes ago. Pete Hegseth co-hosts Fox and Friends on the weekend, of course, and he joins us tonight from Hawaii. Hey, Pete.
Hey, Tucker. Thanks for having me.
How is it?
It was, I got to tell you, being in that hangar, it was an emotional experience. First of all, before it even started, very apropos, the song Amazing Grace played. Amazing Grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me. I once was lost, but now I'm found. These young men who went to fight a war at the beginning of the Cold War for our country, finally returning home. And I was also struck by the individual attention given to every flag-dropped container. Each one of these individual Americans, Tucker, in our country, we ask individual patriots to sign up and go fight for our freedoms that we have here, unlike communist and collectivist societies that send waves of men with no care for what happens next. The fact that 65 years later, this kind of attention is given, that we honor their sacrifice, the vice president there to give the keynote address, was heartening to me as a veteran myself, who would hope that if I was lost on the battlefield, any president in the future would come find me. But a big win for America today, and a testament, I think, to President Trump's commitment to the right outcome on the Korean Peninsula.
Pete, is there any other country that tries as hard as the U.S. does over as many years as the U.S. does to get its war dead home?
Absolutely not. Leave no man behind is an extreme, maybe Israel, in the modern Israel, but over the centuries of our country, no country has valued life and then valued the remains and the connection to that sacrifice more than the United States of America. No one has poured more soil on foreign countries for our own freedom and the freedom of others to defeat Nazis and communists and stand up to rogue regimes. And when we do so, we make a promise to that soldier, that Marine, that airman, that sailor, and that family, and the community, that we will do everything to bring them home alive, or in this case, missing in action, or a prisoner of war, or deceased. Something like this is a testament to future generations, that our country will honor the promise that we made to you. And there's a lot of personal stories. One in particular, Tucker, First Lieutenant Frank Salazar volunteered to go to Korea in 1952. He was killed on New Year's Eve of 1952 when his P-51 was shot down by ground fire. Before he left, he gave a hug to his 4-year-old girl, Diane Brown. She was in that hangar that's right over my shoulder today. She's been looking for her father for over 60 years. He may be returned today, or at least some of his comrades. A powerful testament to this great country.
Ah, that's a tearjerker. Pete Hegseth in Hawaii. Thanks very much for that.
Thanks, Tucker.
The advocates of having California secede from the rest of the country, it's a real thing. They have a new plan. They're going to turn half the state into an Indian reservation. Huh. In the interest of bringing you all the news, we're going to talk to the leader of that movement after the break. Well, the 2016 presidential campaign was obviously contentious. Sometimes it got violent, especially for Trump supporters who dared to show their face in cities that didn't vote for Trump. After one Trump rally in San Jose, California, many of the president's supporters were pelted with eggs and worse by a mob of protesters. Police, by the way, did nothing as this happened. After the attacks, 20 Trump supporters sued San Jose police, and now a court has cleared that lawsuit to go forward. Harmeet Dillon is a civil rights attorney. She represents the Trump supporters in their lawsuit, and she joins us tonight. Harmeet, thanks for coming on. I know we've had you explain this to us a couple of times, but the facts are so remarkable. Can you just summarize them for our viewers who may not be familiar?
Sure. June 2nd, 2016, about a month before Donald Trump became the nominee, he had a big rally in San Jose. I was honored to be there and do the Pledge of Allegiance, and we had a great event. As we were leaving, the 250 riot gear-clad San Jose police who were there on the scene forced all of the people leaving to come out through one exit and directed them away from the most direct path to the garages and into a riot of several hundred anti-Trump violent types waving Mexican flags with large 6-foot poles. And, the eggs are just one part of it. People were sucker punched. People were hit in the head with bags of rocks, clothes torn off of them. Elderly people had their glasses ripped off and had to, flee for their lives. It was like a third world country, Tucker, and the police stood there and did nothing and told people that they were not allowed to help. And so a few weeks later, we filed this federal civil rights lawsuit, and the city police and the city appealed it to the Ninth Circuit, where the Ninth Circuit ruled on Friday that our case can go forward and that the officers do not have qualified immunity because the allegations are so outrageous that they're clearly unconstitutional if we can prove them.
Well, they are outrageous. We're almost time. I just can't believe that most cops in any city would be in favor of this. Tell us where this order came from, do you believe?
We believe the order came from the top. The mayor, Sam Liccardo, the chief of police, we believe they were involved. The district court did dismiss those two from the case, and we don't get to appeal that until the end of the case. But several police supervisors are now defendants in this case and hopefully will be held accountable for what they did that day.
I hope so, and I hope you'll keep us posted. Harmeet Dillon, thanks very much.
Thank you.
Speaking of California, the plan to break the state off from the United States has a new wrinkle, the creation of the largest Indian reservation using half the state of California. We'll get details coming up. And to break California off from the rest of the United States is back with an interesting new twist. The leaders of CalExit have announced a new version of their scheme to create an independent California. In this, all federal lands in the state, which is about half of all of California, will be returned to American Indian tribes, creating, quote, the first ever autonomous Native American nation in North America. Organizers say this country would provide a buffer zone between the California Republic and Trump's America. Marcus Ruiz-Evans is co-founder of CalExit and always game enough to come on our show, and we appreciate that. He joins us tonight from Fresno. Marcus, thanks a lot for coming on.
So, Tucker, thanks for having me back on again, and I came prepared. We brought you your shirt. I'll ship it to you after the show.
I love it. I will wear that, ironically, of course. So, but I'm looking at this plan, and I notice that the Indians are getting the inland parts, the eastern parts of California, and everybody else is getting the choice real estate where the majority of the state's population lived. If you really wanted to atone for historic sins, why wouldn't you give the Indians Santa Monica, La Jolla, right? Napa? Why not do that?
Good point. That's a great point. You're totally right.
Yeah.
You know, the best thing to do for Native American people would be to give them back all of the land, and everybody who's not Native would leave, and then petition to become an immigrant, and then Native people could choose who they wanted to come back in. Obviously, that's not going to happen. So what we did at CalExit was say, what's the best thing that we could do that's not going to fix genocide, isn't going to fix everything, not make it all perfect, but what's the biggest leap that we could make in the right direction? And we felt that giving over half of California, and basically the American-controlled part, to Native people who actually own the land would at least be a step in the right direction. And I want to point out,
now, are you basing this? Wait, can I just ask you? No, I know. Sure. It's California. You know what I mean? Like, you'll figure it out. It's a work in progress. But is there a specific Indian reservation that you think is a kind of model for good governance that you're basing this on? Can you point to a reservation currently in the United States and say, we want California to be more like that?
No. Well, first, we don't call them Indians. We call them natives or indigenous. Second, we don't call it a reservation.
Well, a lot of Indians call themselves Indians, just so you know. Okay.
I'm not trying to debate. I'm just saying how we in CalExit refer to it. It's definitely not a reservation. And to answer your question, we're doing it as not a reservation because there is no good model of a reservation. Reservations are a failed system by Americans to make up for the genocide that they caused against Native people. Native people don't actually
I agree with that, actually.
Forbes magazine pointed this out.
No, I mean, it's demonstrably true. The reservations are a disaster for the people who live on them. No, I totally agree with that. Are you worried, though, that this could be open to exploitation? I mean, what would prevent Elizabeth Warren from coming in as an Indian and saying, I'm now the king of this new country? I mean, would there be some test to make sure that you really are an Indian before you take possession of half of California?
So I want to point out what I said was that reservations aren't working out because of America. America does not let Native people own their land. They're not able to take profits from it. The FBI can go and harass them anytime. The schools provided for them are horrible. The court system provided for them is horrible. And they don't even have the ability to protect their own drinking water, as we saw with the protests recently. To answer your question specifically, Elizabeth Warren would not be able to come in there unless the Native people of that area said that she's welcome. So if the Native
tribe is a Native. Well, hold on, Marcus. Slow down. She is a Native person,
which is their call, then yes, she could. But if they didn't do that, it doesn't matter what she says; she wouldn't be allowed in.
Okay. Well, I think now you're winning me over. Now, I just want to know how this works. So the idea is this is atonement for things that happened a long time ago. So if one of my ancestors had something stolen from him 150 years ago, does that mean that the descendants of the person who stole it owe me the money with interest, if I can find them? This is under your kind of system of justice. Yeah, it is.
So not not at an individual level. So if your grandfather did something racist and horrible, you shouldn't be punished for that. However, you did benefit from it, but it's a mistake to go after you as a person. So what we're saying is that the people and the government representing the people should make amendments. So we're not saying we're picking on individuals. We're saying the government of California should take a step.
Millions of people live in this area. We're almost out of time, but what's going to happen to the millions of people who live in this Indian country? Like you aren't Indian.
Well, the primary Trump voters who live in that area will have to do what brown-skinned people tell them to do, because brown-skinned people will be in charge. And if they don't like that, they're welcome to leave California.
Wow, re-education camps. I knew it was going to get to this, Marcus. What I love about you is your honesty. We're out of time. 9 seconds left. Great to see you tonight. Thank you. I know you are. I love that.
Thank you, Tucker.
That's about it for us tonight.